The first nail I drove into the porch beam of my great-great-grandfather's cabin echoed like a gunshot through the valley. Morning mist still clung to the pine trees surrounding Lancaster Ridge, but already I could feel a storm brewing and, not from the sky. This cabin had stood on the ridge since 1843, built by my ancestors with hand tools, sweat and stone, pulled from the same hills I now stood on. After retiring from 38 years in structural engineering, I came home to restore it, not flip it, not sell it, restore it. For legacy, for peace. But peace doesn't come easy when you've got an HOA next door. Technically, I wasn't part of the Lakewood Pines community. My 30-acre parcel, carved out generations before zoning laws became fashionable, sat just outside the HOA boundary. But Lakewood Pines had been growing like a weed. Somewhere along the way, someone got the idea that if they couldn't legally own the land, they could still control it. That someone's name was Nancy Griggs. She first appeared 2 days after I started repairs. I was hauling old pine beams off the back of my truck when a white Mercedes rolled up, dust curling around its wheels. Out stepped a woman in high heels and a wide-brimmed sun hat, impractical for gravel, even more so for confrontation. "You can't do this," she said, pointing at the cabin like it had personally offended her. I squinted at her. "Do what?" "Exactly this construction. You're violating HOA visual standards, environmental impact codes, and architectural continuity." I leaned against the tailgate. "I'm not in your HOA. This is private land. Family land." She tilted her head with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've annexed everything east of the fire road. Your property is adjacent. That puts you in the zone of influence." I laughed. She did in single quotes. Nancy left in a huff, her tires spitting gravel. I didn't think much of it until the county sheriff showed up 3 hours later. Deputy Lewis was professional enough, apologetic. "Even we got a call about unpermitted construction," he said, eyeing my tools. "Noise complaints. Possible zoning violation." I handed him a copy of my deed, stamped and notarized, along with the original homestead exemption document. My land was grandfathered in, exempt from any zoning reclassifications or neighborhood association overreach. Lewis scratched his head, handed the papers back, and said, "You're clean, but you might want to keep a copy on you. Sounds like someone's gunning for a fight." He was right. The next morning I found a bright orange stop work notice duct taped to my cabin door. It wasn't from the county. It was from the HOA, unauthorized signage, no legal standing. Still, it sent a message. Nancy wasn't backing down. Within days, more HOA foot soldiers started appearing. Men with clipboards, women with tablets. They hovered near the property line, snapping photos of my construction site and whispering like school kids who'd spotted a scandal. Nancy filed a noise complaint, then a littering complaint, then a visual disturbance notice claiming my construction materials were an eyesore, and just like clockwork, the cops returned twice in 1 week each time. The same story. Anonymous complaints. Suspicious activity, unregulated building. I stayed calm, showed my paperwork, kept working, but the message was clear. They were trying to grind me down, not with force, but fatigue. The HOA couldn't legally stop me, so they were going to drown me in inconvenience. Bureaucratic paper cuts. One night, I stood on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the sun disappear behind the tree line. Rusty, my old Shepherd mix, lay at my feet, ears twitching at the distant sound of a golf cart somewhere below. I wasn't a man easily rattled, but I knew the HOA's game, and I knew they wouldn't stop. Nancy didn't just want me to stop repairs. She wanted me gone. But what she didn't understand, what no one in their pristine plastic neighborhood understood, was that this land ran through my blood. I didn't inherit it. I belonged to it, and I don't break easy. Not then, not ever. By the following week, the peaceful crack of my nail gun was joined by the quiet hum of drones. Yes, drones. Twice a day. Just after sunrise and again before dusk, one would buzz in low over the tree line, circling my roof, my truck, even the pile of reclaimed oak boards I'd hauled from a nearby salvage yard. I caught its red camera light flashing. One morning as it hovered near my front porch, Nancy was done playing subtle. Later that same day, I discovered orange surveyor flags stabbed into the soil along the shared access road. Neon string crisscrossed between them, marking off a so-called maintenance buffer zone. When I called the county to verify, they told me there had been no sanctioned utility work authorized. It was a bluff. An illegal one, but strategic. Next came the landscapers. 2 men in neon vests showed up with a trenching machine and began tearing a shallow line across the gravel road. I stopped them midway, demanding permits. One of them shrugged. "We were hired by the HOA to run drip irrigation lines to their flower beds across a road they don't own." I snapped. He looked genuinely confused. "They said it was part of the community." It wasn't. Still, when the trench was filled, back in, my truck couldn't clear the new ridge. For the first time in 20 years, the mail stopped coming. UPS marked my property as undeliverable. My propane refill canceled without notice. They weren't just watching anymore, they were cutting me off. I filed complaints, sent certified letters to the HOA and their property management firm. No response. I even approached Nancy directly at the Lakewood Pines clubhouse during one of their board meetings. She greeted me with that same icy smile. "Cole, you're welcome to attend, but you're not a voting member." "I'm not here to vote," I said, holding up a stack of photo-strewn footage, trench work, flagged in. "This is harassment." Nancy's voice dropped an octave, saccharine and slow. "If you would simply agree to voluntary compliance with our visual standards and construction codes, we could avoid all this unpleasantness." "Let me make this clear," I said, stepping closer. "You have no jurisdiction over my land, none. The only reason you're doing this is because I won't fold." Her smile tightened. "You've made yourself a disruption to the harmony of our community, and if you won't cooperate, we will escalate." And escalate she did. Over the next 2 weeks, I was cited for everything from unauthorized wildlife attractants translation, my compost bin, to nighttime noise violations because I ran a generator after dusk. An HOA security citizens in golf carts with radios was posted at the end of my driveway to monitor compliance. They set up a camera at the entrance to the Ridge Road, mounted on a pole, solar-powered. I took it down. 2 days later, 2 sheriff's deputies. You showed up again. One younger, visibly annoyed, the other quiet and cautious. "We've got reports of trespassing, camera vandalism, and threatening behavior," the younger one said from the HOA. "I've got footage of their crew digging across public easements, of their drones flying over my windows, and this." I handed them the formal letter from the county survey office affirming my land's independent status. "Proves I'm not under their authority." They didn't arrest me. They didn't even stay long, but they didn't stop it either. And that's when I realized the HOA didn't need power, they only needed the illusion of it. Nancy wasn't waging a legal battle, she was waging a psychological one. Death by paper cuts. Make me miserable enough, isolated enough, that I'd give up and move out. Sell to someone pliable. Someone she could mold. But Nancy had made a mistake. She thought she was dealing with just another aging handyman in a flannel shirt. She didn't realize I'd built skyscrapers, repaired military installations, and filed engineering reports that rewrote state building codes. I didn't just know how buildings stood, I knew how entire systems collapsed. And now I had a new project, hers. As I watched the drone buzz away that evening, its little blinking light fading into the twilight, I opened my laptop. It was time to hit back. Not with complaints, not with threats, with something far more devastating. I hadn't wielded a weapon in this fight, not yet, but I was about to unleash something far more surgical than fists or fire. Numbers. See. The thing about a structural engineer who's spent 4 decades inspecting high-rises, hospitals, and schools, we don't just understand stress points, we find weaknesses where no one else thinks to look. The HOA wanted to play a game of legal intimidation. Fine. I'd respond with bureaucracy sharp enough to draw blood. I started with public records. Lakewood Pines, sprawling amenities complex, sat on a prime 5-acre plot, complete with a luxury clubhouse, Olympic-sized pool, bocce courts, and 3 full-time employees. A glossy jewel for their residents and a monstrous liability hiding in plain sight. According to the county assessor's records, the complex was listed at just over $980,000 in assessed value. Laughable, based on its size, materials, upgrades, and comparable structures I'd evaluated professionally. It should have been valued at over $2.4 million. The reason for the discrepancy: an unverified improvement exemption from 15 years ago, likely pushed through by a former board member with connections at the assessor's office. A convenient oversight, one that had saved them hundreds of thousands in taxes over the years. I documented everything: blueprints, aerial imagery, satellite comparisons, and municipal permits. I even got my hands on archived building plans from the original contractor's public documents, but ones only someone like me would know how to request. By the end of the week, I'd compiled a formal reassessment petition, signed under my professional license and submitted directly to the county assessor with a 10-page supporting analysis. Dry reading for most, devastating for the HOA. The wheels began turning faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, a white county vehicle pulled up outside the Lakewood Pines clubhouse. I watched from my porch as an assessor, clipboard in hand, was met by Nancy and 2 other board members. The conversation was civil, until it wasn't. Nancy's posture stiffened, and her finger jutted toward my ridge. I could almost hear the shrill accusations from 100 yards away. That weekend, 2 more county inspectors arrived, this time with measuring equipment and a drone of their own. They didn't speak to anyone, not even the HOA, just documented, measured, calculated. It was silent warfare, and I was winning. Then the letter arrived too. Lakewood Pines Homeowners Association Notice of Property Value, Reassessment, New Valuation, $2,453,000 Adjusted Annual Tax, $118,350. Back tax liability 10 years, $87,000. Due within 90 days. Didn't see Nancy for a while after that. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, tight-lipped gossip over backyard fences, murmurs at community events, whispered questions about where all the HOA dues were going. Residents started asking for transparency, demanding emergency board meetings. And the best part, not one word of it had my name attached. Officially, I was just the concerned professional who filed a public record correction. But Nancy knew, and the way her gaze burned across a cul-de-sac one morning when we crossed paths made it clear she realized exactly who'd pulled the trigger. Still, they didn't approach me. Pride, perhaps, or fear, but their claws retracted fast. The trench, across the access road, leveled, re-graveled even. The HOA patrols disappeared. Surveillance cameras vanished from the entry pole. My mail service resumed, and even the local propane company called to apologize, saying someone had accidentally canceled my deliveries. It was stunning how quickly a tax bill turned tyranny into retreat. But I wasn't done, because this wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about precedent. Nancy had weaponized bureaucracy to try and break me, but I'd taken her playbook, rewritten it in ink, and handed it to the very institutions she thought were her allies. And now she'd paid the cost not in bruises, but in budget cuts. The community pool hours were slashed, HOA board members' stipends were revoked, dues skyrocketed overnight, and suddenly neighbors once too afraid to speak were showing up at meetings demanding resignations. I stood on my newly finished porch one evening, watching headlights crawl out of the neighborhood. A white Mercedes rolled slowly past the edge of my property, windows up, head low. Nancy. She didn't wave, didn't need to. We both knew what had happened here. She'd built her empire on intimidation, manipulation, and paper walls. I'd brought the whole thing down with numbers, truth, and a single well-placed push. And yet, the land was quiet again, but my gut told me the story wasn't over. By late October, the ridge had quieted. The whir of drones gave way to the gentle rustling of leaves. The HOA's orange survey flags, once scattered across the road like battle markers, had vanished. Their patrol golf carts, once longer loitered near my gate. The war, it seemed, had ended not with an explosion but with a retreat, and I kept building. The wraparound porch was complete, fitted with timber railings. I milled myself. I restored the original fireplace using stone pulled from the ridge's southern slope, just like my great-great-grandfather had done. Every nail I drove felt like reclamation, not just of property, but of peace, of legacy. Rusty, my old shepherd mix, rested beside me as I sanded the front steps. The scars left by months of HOA harassment were still there, but they no longer burned. If anything, they were reminders of what it takes to stand firm when someone tries to erase your roots. Then, something unexpected happened. People started showing up. First, it was a retired couple who lived just beyond the HOA's southern boundary. They brought apple cider and an apology. "We always admired what you were doing," the man said, nodding toward the cabin. "Just didn't want to get on the wrong side of Nancy." Next came a single mother whose fence the HOA forced her to replace twice in 1 year for being 2 inches too tall. She'd heard what I did, wanted to know how to challenge. Her own dues increased. And then came others. A contractor fined for parking his trailer overnight, a teacher reprimanded for flying a US flag on her porch, a widower who'd been told to repaint his door 3 times in 6 months because the shade of green wasn't compliant. They'd all been afraid. Until they weren't. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my cabin, or Nancy's vendetta, it was about power. And what happens when someone finally stands up to it. I started hosting weekend barbecues on the ridge. No signs, no speeches, just neighbors gathering on neutral ground. No HOA permission needed. We laughed, told stories, and watched as the sun dipped below the pines, casting long shadows across the land that had started it all. And in those moments, I saw it clearly. Nancy hadn't lost because of me. She'd lost because her power had always been borrowed, built on silence, intimidation, and the illusion of control. All it took was one man refusing to bend, and the whole facade began to crumble. About a month after the tax hike hit, a notice went up at the Lakewood Pines clubhouse. President Nancy Griggs resigns, effective immediately. No fanfare, no explanation, just a quiet exit. I heard rumors that she tried to fight the reassessment in court and lost, that she sold her house and moved to Florida, that she blamed everything on a vindictive squatter up on the ridge. I wasn't interested in gloating. Truth was, I felt something closer to pity. Nancy had spent years building a kingdom of rules, only to watch it collapse because she couldn't recognize the one boundary she had no right to cross. Weeks passed. The community held elections. New faces took the board. They slashed dues, reversed several of Nancy's policies, and even issued a formal apology to affected residents, though mine never came. Didn't matter, because I'd already won the only thing that ever mattered: freedom. Now I spend my mornings on the porch with coffee in hand and Rusty at my feet. The ridge breathes easy again. No buzz of surveillance, no trench lines cutting through the road. Just the wind, the trees, and the sound of my hammer whenever I find something else worth fixing. Sometimes, I still get looks when I drive through Lakewood Pines, some grateful, some guarded, but all of them aware, and that's enough because they know what I know now. You don't defeat a bully by yelling louder. You do it by knowing who you are and making damn sure they remember it. So if anyone ever asks what happened up on Lancaster Ridge, I just smile and say, they brought paperwork, I brought proof, they made noise, I made history.